Welcome to True Crime Audio Pod, where we unravel the threads of the most disturbing true crime stories. Today's story takes us to the quiet streets of Mansfield, Ohio, where a heinous crime shatters a family, setting a son on a lifelong quest for justice. On the crisp morning of January 2nd, 1990, Lieutenant David Messmore stepped into the precinct, his arms laden with steaming cups of coffee for his colleagues. The festive echo of Christmas had faded, replaced by the stern rhythm of routine. As a seasoned member of the Mansfield, Ohio, Police Department's Major Crimes Unit, Lieutenant Messmore was well acquainted with the unpredictable nature of his duties. But nothing could have prepared him for the enigma that the new year had presented. Porcelain mugs clinked gently on desks as he settled in, his eyes methodically absorbing the events detailed in the reports from New Year's Day. Everything appeared to be in order, the usual misdemeanors and disturbances, until a peculiar entry caught his attention. It was a missing persons report for a woman named Noreen Boyle, but not filed by a relative or spouse. Instead, it was her best friend who had sounded the alarm. The lieutenant furrowed his brow, the anomaly of the situation whispering doubts into the back of his mind. The official account stated that when officers had visited the Boyle residence, they were greeted with the perplexed words of Noreen's 11-year-old son, Landry. He insisted it was uncharacteristic for his mother to vanish into the night without a word, especially on an occasion such as New Year's Eve. His testimony was adamant: her room was untouched, her belongings were in place. Intrigued, Lieutenant Messmore delved into the phone directory, unearthing the fact that Noreen was married to Dr. John Boyle, a 46-year-old osteopath. Determination took hold, and he decided to make his way to the Boyle homestead himself. Despite the voice of experience whispering that missing persons often resurface of their own accord, perhaps following a trivial domestic dispute, the words of a bewildered son haunted the lieutenant. There was something disquieting about the boy's remarks, an intangible thread that pulled at the fabric of the case, beckoning Messmore into its mystery. On a day that marked the return to the ordinary after holiday festivities, Lieutenant David Messmore made his way to the substantial Boyle residence. It was the second day of the new year, and the afternoon sun hung heavily in the winter sky. At precisely noon, he arrived, his presence signifying the resumption of routine in the wake of celebration, and his purpose there a stark reminder of the responsibilities that lay beyond the season's merriment. The door to the Boyle home opened, revealing one of Dr. Boyle's relatives. Messmore introduced himself with the courtesy befitting his role and the gravity of the situation. He was there to gather threads that might lead to the whereabouts of the missing Noreen Boyle. With a subtle nod, he was invited into the fold of the family's private space, a realm now punctured by the sharpness of uncertainty. Inside, the home was a tableau of concern and quiet anxiety. There, gathered in the warmth of the interior, stood another woman aside from the relative, and Landry, the Boyle's son, a tableau of the disrupted life of a family in distress. The woman, a pillar in Landry's educational life and a friend of his mother, had come because of the worry that gnawed at her heart. And there, too, was Elizabeth, the young child recently brought into the Boyle family, a symbol of hope and a new beginning, perhaps, in a marriage that had seen its fair share of tempests. As Messmore wove his questions into the conversation, the relative shared her own piece of the puzzle. She had come from Youngstown, Ohio, to be with John Boyle over the holidays, she explained. John was not present, being away in Erie, Pennsylvania, with aspirations of expanding his professional practice. She recounted the echo of an argument on New Year's Eve, one that had ended with Noreen's departure, an event that seemed as sudden as it was inexplicable. After the adults had exchanged words heavy with speculation and concern, Landry approached the lieutenant, his young face etched with the seriousness of matters far beyond his years. He requested a private exchange, away from the ears of others. In a voice barely above a whisper, the boy shared his deepest fears. His mother had never before left them like this. In the silence of the night, he had heard a disturbing noise, a sound reminiscent of an impact against a wall, followed by the scream of his sister, who had been sleeping in the parental room. With a promise to look into every possible lead, Messmore left the Boyles' home. The next logical step led him to Lucy Woods, Noreen's best friend, whose insights would prove invaluable. Lucy portrayed Noreen as the epitome of maternal devotion, a beautiful blonde who initially reveled in the social stature of being a doctor's wife. She was always impeccably dressed, which contrasted starkly with her husband's penchant for casual attire. Lucy recounted the trials Noreen faced, enduring one affair after another, choosing to turn a blind eye for the sake of her children. The adoption of Elizabeth, a little girl from Taiwan, was Noreen's attempt to mend the widening rift in their marriage. However, the summer of 1989 had brought new trials. Landry had unwittingly witnessed his father with another woman, Sherry Lee Campbell, engaging in intimacies that should have been reserved for his wife, wearing jewelry that belonged to Noreen. The boy had bravely confided in his mother, leading to a legal maelstrom. Noreen filed a lawsuit against John for gross neglect of duty and extreme cruelty, only to be met with a counterclaim that twisted her accusations back upon her. Lucy told the detective of their frequent conversations, where Noreen had ominously instructed her to investigate should anything happen to her. The narrative took a dark turn as Lucy recalled a call from Noreen, detailing a chilling threat from John over something as domestic as laundry and the impending visit of his relative for the holiday season. Lucy described Noreen's apprehension about this relative, whose arrival coincided with the tense backdrop of their pending divorce. On December 31st, Noreen missed a lunch date with Lucy, a deviation from her usual punctual and communicative nature. This absence prompted Lucy to embark on a frantic search, to no avail. Calls to mutual friends yielded nothing. Noreen had vanished without a trace. Left with no other recourse, Lucy reached out to the police, only to be met with procedural delay. Lieutenant Messmore's mind was abuzz with the information as he made his way back to the Boyle residence, later that afternoon. His return was met with a cold reception. John Boyle's relative relayed a message from John, admonishing the lieutenant for his perceived harassment. She conveyed that John's attorney would soon be taking charge of the matter, urging Messmore not to return. But the detective's resolve was unshaken. Evening found Messmore once again at the Boyles' doorstep, now facing the family's attorney. The message was clear: Dr. Boyle would not be speaking to the detective. The attorney's defense was preemptive, guarding against any potential misinterpretation that could compromise his client amid the ongoing divorce. As a final assertion of their stance, a letter was affixed to both the front and back doors, a written declaration barring police entry, signed by both John Boyle and his attorney. The letter stood as a physical and legal barricade, a sign that the Boyles were retreating behind their rights, leaving Messmore with no choice but to step back. The laws of Ohio, which he had sworn to uphold, now held him at bay, despite the swirling cloud of suspicion that hung over the house. As the shadows of the evening grew longer, the detective retreated, the house behind him silent, yet screaming with the secrets it kept hidden within its walls. As the January days unfolded with the relentless march of time, the enigmatic disappearance of Noreen Boyle hung heavily over the Mansfield community. Lieutenant David Messmore, a detective whose competence was only matched by his tenacity, led his team in a meticulous search for any fragment of evidence that might illuminate the circumstances of Noreen's vanishing. Yet, the world seemed to guard its secrets jealously, yielding nothing new to their inquiries. The lieutenant, with his seasoned instincts, recognized that the key to this puzzle might very well lie with the person who knew Noreen best in her final days, her son, Landry. A phone call set the stage for another conversation with the boy, this time within the familiar walls of his school, under the watchful eye of the principal, a woman whose loyalty to Noreen was as firm as the truth they sought. In the quiet sanctity of the principal's office, Landry recounted the events of that fateful night once again. This retelling, however, was etched with finer details, painting a more vivid picture of the night's unsettling events. Landry spoke of the heated exchange between his parents, the ominous thud that followed, and the chilling silence of his father's footsteps halting outside his bedroom door. The boy, feigning sleep, had felt the weight of his father's gaze before the door eventually closed, leaving him to the shadows that now seemed to whisper secrets. Morning had revealed his mother's absence, and Landry, with the innocence of youth disrupted, had noticed the disarray of her bed linens. The covers were not merely folded back, but were stripped away to the bed's end, a silent testament to a departure that was anything but ordinary. When confronted, his father's explanation was a tale of a sudden exit, a narrative that shifted like sand when recounted later, transforming into a story of an impromptu vacation, a tale Landry was expected to believe, despite his father's insistence on not involving the police. Lieutenant Messmore, a sculptor of truth from the clay of human experience, asked the young boy to take note of anything missing from his mother's belongings. The promise of another conversation lingered in the air as the meeting concluded, with both the principal and Landry in agreement. The passage of days brought another twist. Landry, through the principal, beckoned Messmore back to the school. The boy revealed a troubling pattern. His father's stories about Noreen's fate were ever-changing, a kaleidoscope of inconsistencies. One version even suggested that Noreen had left the country, but Landry, with the clarity that sometimes only a child possesses, had discovered his mother's passport secreted away, a silent witness hiding in the dark folds of a closet. The principal, now more than just an educator but a guardian of her students' well-being, confided in Messmore that Dr. Boyle had attempted to weave a web of deceit, trying to persuade her of Noreen's well-being with tales of phone calls and mundane concerns like dental appointments. Mansfield, Ohio, had become a nexus of whispered theories and concerned murmurs, all centered around the troubling case of Noreen Boyle's disappearance. The community's unease was palpable, feeding the pages of the local newspaper that laid bare the enigmatic circumstances of her vanishing. Lieutenant David Messmore's investigation into Dr. John Boyle's life revealed a pattern of infidelity, casting a shadow over the doctor's facade of respectability. 10 days into the painstaking investigation, just as the story had gripped the town's attention through a detailed newspaper expose, an anonymous call pierced the steady rhythm of the inquiry. The voice on the other end, shrouded in mystery, suggested that Dr. Boyle had rented a jackhammer in recent times, an odd detail that piqued Messmore's interest. Determined, Messmore and his colleagues pursued this slender thread, tracing it to a rental company that confirmed the unsettling detail. The doctor had indeed rented a jackhammer, but the circumstances were peculiar. The rental had been reserved a week before Noreen's disappearance and picked up just 2 days prior. The attempt to disguise the transaction under another name, only to resort to his own when pressed for identification, added layers of suspicion to the already murky waters of the case. As if the puzzle needed more complexity, a second anonymous tip followed the first, leading the detective to discover a purchase by Dr. Boyle that was out of character for a man of his means, a large quantity of green outdoor carpeting that he had laid down himself. With a growing sense of foreboding, Messmore contacted the school principal, seeking to involve Landry once more. The detective tasked the boy with a mission to search for any signs of the newly mentioned green carpeting or recent concrete work within his home. Despite the thoroughness of his search, Landry reported no findings correlating with the detective's inquiries. Expanding the scope of his investigation, Messmore engaged with individuals familiar with the Boyles, uncovering a tapestry of properties scattered across Ohio, each a potential clue in their own right. There was the farmhouse in the south, a condominium gazing out upon Lake Erie, and the medical office spaces in Mansfield, one almost ready for Dr. Boyle's transition. With quiet diligence, Messmore and his team canvassed each location, their eyes combing through the details for the green carpet or evidence of new concrete. Yet, each search concluded with the same disheartening result: nothing. The lead that remained was as daunting as it was necessary. Dr. Boyle's intended move to Erie, Pennsylvania, lay beyond Messmore's jurisdiction, a new challenge in an already complex case. Cooperation with Pennsylvanian law enforcement was imperative. The call was made, the request sent forth, and as Messmore awaited their response, the mystery of Noreen Boyle lay as a heavy silence waiting to be broken by the clamor of truth. Messmore briefed Peach on the intricacies of the case and the ominous cloud of suspicion that hovered over Dr. John Boyle. There was a fervent plea for assistance in uncovering any of Boyle's dealings that might shed light on Noreen's disappearance. Peach, methodical and determined, began to comb through the fabric of Erie's property records and, with a stroke of investigative acumen, unearthed a fresh thread, a new listing under Boyle's name. The discovery led him to an upscale address in Mill Creek Township, a locale that bespoke exclusivity and privacy. Although the residence lay outside his jurisdiction, Peach didn't let procedural boundaries deter him. He photographed the property, capturing the facade behind which answers might lie, and conducted discreet surveillance in the hopes of a glimpse or a clue that would lead to Boyle. The property's origins were traced back to a real estate agent, Betty Miller, who soon found herself in conversation with Peach. On January 22nd, they sat down to unravel the history of the property transaction. Miller recounted her first meeting with the Boyles in November 1989, a professional encounter punctuated by subsequent phone calls and tours of potential homes. One home, the very one in Mill Creek Township, had captured the couple's interest above all others. Miller's memory was meticulous as she detailed the oddities of the transaction. Dr. Boyle had made the purchase without the usual financial wrangling, an anomaly in itself. His insistence on an early move-in date and the request for the builder's blueprints to be left behind were unusual demands that now resonated with an ominous tone. But it was a call on December 8th that introduced a peculiar twist. Dr. Boyle sought to amend the contract, a seemingly simple change of a signature from N. Sherry Boyle to Noreen S. Boyle. It was a detail that might have been dismissed by an untrained eye, but in the context of Noreen's disappearance, it loomed large and suspicious. As Peach divulged the nature of his inquiry, the final piece of the day's puzzle emerged with Miller's revelation. The woman she had met, the one who had signed the contract, bore no resemblance to the missing Noreen Boyle. Instead, she was a diminutive, brunette woman, visibly pregnant, a stark contrast to the tall, blonde woman whose absence had caused such turmoil. Lieutenant Peach, armed with these revelations, recognized the gravity of the information he had uncovered. It was a lead with the potential to pivot the direction of the investigation, a lead that Messmore had been hoping for. Together, they stood on the precipice of a breakthrough, the truth within tantalizing reach as they peered into the depths of a case that was as convoluted as it was heartbreaking. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place with a grim inevitability. The woman who had posed as Noreen Boyle was, in fact, Sherry Lee Campbell, the other woman entangled in Dr. Boyle's clandestine life. Sherry, the mistress, had just given birth to Boyle's child, a fact that crystallized a motive for the unthinkable. If Noreen Boyle was indeed out of the picture, Dr. Boyle could start anew with Sherry and their child without the complications of a divorce or dual households. Lieutenant Peach, with this revelation fresh in mind, listened as the real estate agent wrestled with a fragment of memory, a detail that eluded her but felt significant. Her promise to call back should the elusive detail resurface was a slender thread of hope. The call came sooner than expected, with the agent recalling Dr. Boyle's curious inquiry about the basement of the Mill Creek Township house. His interest in the composition of the basement floor and the desire to lower it, despite ample ceiling height, struck an odd chord. It was a detail that might seem innocuous in isolation but loomed large against the backdrop of a missing persons case. Peach immediately relayed this new information to Messmore. The detectives now believed they had gathered enough circumstantial evidence to warrant a thorough search of the properties associated with Dr. Boyle in both Ohio and Pennsylvania. However, jurisdictional boundaries meant that Messmore would have to coordinate with the Mill Creek Township Police Department to proceed with the search in Pennsylvania. As January 24th dawned, Messmore and his team prepared their case for the search warrants. A crucial element was a piece of evidence that had been kept from the public eye, an account from the youngest and most vulnerable witness. The principal at Landry's school had gently coaxed young Elizabeth to show what she had seen on the night her mother disappeared. The child's innocent reenactment was heart-wrenching. It was more than just gestures, it was a silent scream for the truth. Elizabeth did more than gesture, she spoke words that would echo through the halls of justice. "Daddy put Mommy on the floor and wrapped her up like a snowman," she said, her voice a tiny bell tolling in the darkness of the tragedy. The image she conjured, of her mother being wrapped up, was a child's way of processing what she had witnessed, a scene so macabre and yet so innocent in her retelling. With the case growing ever more complex, Lieutenant Peach handed the reins over to Detective Michael Dugan of the Mill Creek Township Police Department. After being briefed on the intricate details of the case, Detectives Messmore and Dugan set to work obtaining the necessary search warrants. The urgency of their mission was clear. They aimed to have the warrants ready for execution by the following day, January 25th. In an abundance of caution, Detective Dugan arranged for covert surveillance of Dr. Boyle's new office and residence in Mill Creek Township. A plainclothes officer would pass by each location hourly, ensuring that if Boyle were to grow suspicious or attempt to remove potential evidence, they would be aware. The break of dawn on January 25th brought a palpable tension. At 9 a.m., Detective Messmore, equipped with a search warrant and the collective resolve of 5 other sleuths, arrived at the Boyle home in Mansfield. They were not alone in their endeavor. Jerry Alt, the assistant district attorney, was there to lend his legal expertise, accompanied by representatives from Children's Services armed with a court order to secure the children's safety. After a brief explanation to Boyle's relative who answered the door, the children were safely escorted to the care of Noreen Boyle's friend, the ever-present school principal. The search commenced with a singular focus, to uncover any trace of the green outdoor carpet or evidence of new concrete that could point to the whereabouts of Noreen Boyle. But as time ticked away, Detective Messmore's seasoned intuition began to signal that their search in Mansfield might be in vain. With a heavy heart but undeterred resolve, he made the decision to leave Ohio behind and head to Pennsylvania, where the second search warrant awaited execution. Upon arrival at the Mill Creek Police Department in the late afternoon, Messmore and Alt were updated on Boyle's movements. Detective Dugan reported that Dr. Boyle had been at his new office early that morning and had left shortly before their arrival. The detectives would later piece together that Boyle's departure was precipitated by a phone call. His relative had alerted him to the search back in Ohio, prompting his swift return. The solemn caravan of law enforcement, led by Detective Messmore and Assistant District Attorney Alt, merged with the Mill Creek detectives and their own Assistant District Attorney to form a formidable force of justice. As they approached Dr. Boyle's new home, the world around them seemed to hush, the only sound the delicate dance of snowflakes against the cold evening air. Despite the rumor of Dr. Boyle's dangerous new acquisition, an Uzi submachine gun, the detectives, armed only with their standard-issue firearms, moved forward, not expecting a confrontation but prepared for the gravity of their task. Outside the house, 3 officers quickly established a perimeter, a silent sentinel against the night as their colleagues, with a sense of urgency, encircled the property. One officer, designated as the archivist of the operation, began to document the search, ensuring every action was recorded. The detectives' focus sharpened as they peered through the garage windows, where the unmistakable hue of green carpet caught their attention, meticulously tailored to fit the expanse of the floor. With the house seemingly empty and all entrances locked tight, they breached the doors, methodically clearing each room to ensure they were alone in their search. The silence of the empty house echoed back at them, a silent witness to their presence. Returning to the garage, they faced the expanse of green carpet, a potential shroud hiding a terrible secret beneath its surface. Working in unison, the detectives lifted and rolled back the carpet, revealing the gray concrete below. Their eyes scanned every inch, searching for any sign of disturbance, any clue that might break the case wide open. Yet, the garage floor yielded nothing. It was not the final resting place they had feared it might be. But the investigative instinct is a force that seeks out the smallest of anomalies, and it was the sight of a simple shovel, leaning innocuously in the corner, that drew their collective gaze. The wooden handle, the blade caked with the residue of concrete or mortar, spoke a silent volume of possibility. It was a grim indicator that pointed toward the basement, the space that had piqued Dr. Boyle's unusual interest before, and now held the focused attention of the sleuths. With heavy hearts but relentless determination, the detectives gravitated toward the basement, a sinking realization settling in. It was there, in the shadowed depths below the house, that they would likely uncover the truth of Noreen Boyle's fate, a truth that the green carpet had been meant to conceal, a truth that the silent shovel seemed to whisper from its corner of the garage. Descending into the basement, the detectives were immediately struck by the stark appearance of freshly applied concrete paint, a detail that did not escape their trained eyes. The basement, with its entirety of poured concrete, seemed to be a canvas recently altered, perhaps in an attempt to conceal something more than just the floor itself. The unusual E-shaped arrangement of the particle board shelving units, standing a deliberate distance from the back wall, suggested a meticulous planning that went beyond simple home improvement. Below the shelves lay the green outdoor carpet, a thread of continuity from the garage, now lying beneath the makeshift construction. The presence of sawdust, a subtle but clear indicator of recent activity, furthered their suspicion. With a systematic approach to preserve the integrity of the scene, the detectives took stock of the items on the shelves. The discovery of a wooden-handled trowel and paintbrushes, one still crusted with gray concrete, began to paint a grim picture. The price tags and purchase information on these items would later serve as breadcrumbs, tracing back to their points of sale. Their hands and knees became their tools as the detectives spread out across the basement floor, their senses attuned to any aberration. It wasn't long before one of them identified a slight depression hidden beneath the carpet, an anomaly in the otherwise uniform surface. Closer inspection revealed a smear of wet concrete on the wall, a silent but damning detail. Without hesitation, the lawmen began dismantling the shelving units that had been so carefully erected. The E-shape, once thought to be an innocent design, now seemed more like a code for what lay beneath. As the shelves came down, the green carpet was exposed in full, inviting a closer examination. A detective, wielding nothing more than a standard-issue knife, made a calculated incision into the carpet. The blade revealed that the concrete beneath was unexpectedly moist, a clear indication that it had not been allowed to set for the usual amount of time. The detectives' efforts in the basement of Dr. Boyle's home began to converge on a disturbing conclusion as they peeled back the green carpet. It didn't resist, almost as if it was a reluctant guardian to the secret beneath. The outline left by the carpet's backing was starkly reminiscent of a grave, a silent, ominous rectangle set against the gray concrete. There was a collective, unspoken understanding among the officers of what would likely be found beneath. The officer in charge of recording the proceedings secured a tripod to ensure the integrity of the excavation documentation. The timestamp would serve as an unimpeachable witness to the unfolding discovery. Lieutenant Dugan reached out to the Mill Creek Streets Department, and soon enough, the tools for what was becoming a grim task arrived, a collection of implements that seemed more suited to a construction site than a suburban home. Dugan and 3 of his fellow officers took on the role of diggers, wielding the tools with a somber determination. They chipped away at the concrete, the sounds of their labor a harsh counterpoint to the quiet dread that filled the space. As the hole expanded and the depth increased, an odor, faint at first but unmistakably the scent of decay, began to rise from the disturbed concrete. It was the glimpse of green canvas through the debris that crystallized their fears into reality. The cloth and the growing stench left no doubt in the detectives' minds about the nature of their find. With the odor intensifying, the need for oxygen equipment became apparent, not only for the practicality of continuing their work but also for the safety of all present. The call was made to the Mill Creek Volunteer Fire Department, and as the detectives awaited the necessary gear, the basement began to fill with more officials. The county coroner, Erie County detectives, and a forensic evidence specialist from the Pennsylvania State Police joined the grim assembly. Each one brought their expertise to bear on what was quickly turning from a missing persons investigation into a recovery operation. The quiet operation inside the basement had its chaotic counterpart outside, where the news of the police's grim work spread swiftly. The media, ever attuned to the police scanners, had descended upon the scene, transforming the residential quietude into a spectacle reminiscent of a carnival. Camera crews and reporters staked out positions, lenses, and microphones poised to capture a story as it unfolded in real time. As the fire department personnel arrived, they brought with them the stark trappings of a rescue operation, air packs and respirators that seemed incongruent with the suburban backdrop. Donning the equipment, the detectives resumed their somber task, the air heavy with the scent of tragedy and the mechanical hum of the news cameras outside. The excavation continued, each movement of the shovel and swing of the sledgehammer bringing them closer to the heartbreaking discovery. When at last the diggers unearthed the green tarpaulin, a somber hush fell over the basement. The detectives, veterans of many such scenes, found their resolve tested once more as they peeled back the layers to reveal the undeniable evidence of a heinous act. The sight of the victim, a blonde woman's bloated body concealed by a plastic bag and the adornments of her daily life, jewelry and a gold Rolex watch, was poignant and disturbing. Detective Messmore, recognizing the described items, felt the gravity of the moment deeply. The watch, its hands frozen in time, marked the moment Noreen Boyle's life was allegedly taken by the one who had vowed to cherish it. With the confirmation of the body's identity, the call to Mansfield was one of grim resolution. The news crackled over the lines, a stark finality to the weeks of searching and speculation. Dr. John Boyle was apprehended by the Mansfield detectives, his arrest marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of another in the tragic saga of Noreen Boyle. The trial that followed was a meticulous recounting of the events, the evidence methodically laid out for judgment. Dr. Boyle, despite his persistent denials and the appeals that would follow, was found guilty, his conviction affirmed by the highest courts in the state. The life sentence without parole for 20 years was a judicial acknowledgement of the gravity of his crime, an attempt to bring closure to a case that had held a community in its thrall. The trial of Dr. John Boyle was not merely a legal proceeding, it became an event woven into the very fabric of Mansfield's community life. Tom Brennan, the former News Journal editor, likened it to an unwelcome soap opera that nonetheless held the town's rapt attention. The courthouse became a stage, and the townspeople, eager for justice or simply drawn by the gravity of the drama, queued each day for entry as if it were a performance they could not miss. The media, in lockstep with the public's interest, ensured that not a moment was lost to posterity. The local television station provided nightly coverage, and the newspaper captured each development, culminating in a special edition that chronicled the trial's conclusion, Dr. Boyle's conviction. At the heart of this whirlwind was Landry, the Boyle's son, who became an emblem of courage and truth. When he took the stand, his unwavering testimony against his father was a poignant act of bravery that was instrumental in the trial's outcome. His words after the trial reflected the weight of his experience, a mix of duty to his mother's memory and a commitment to honesty in the face of unspeakable personal tragedy. Yet, the judicial resolution of his father's fate did not herald peace for Landry. Instead, his world continued to crumble. Abandoned by relatives who should have been his refuge, Landry faced the stark reality of being unwanted, a boy bereft of both parents, shunned by his extended family, and forcibly separated from his sister as she was adopted without him. The kindness of Detective Messmore and his wife offered a temporary haven, a gesture of compassion that transcended professional obligation. However, even this respite was fleeting, severed by a judge's ruling. Landry's odyssey of loss and dislocation finally reached a semblance of stability with the Zeiglers, a family from Ontario who opened their home and hearts to him. The tale of Landry and Elizabeth is one marked by the kind of heartache that spans a lifetime. After being swept into separate lives by the currents of their shared tragedy, the siblings lost all contact. Decades rolled by, yet the bond of blood remained, unspoken but ever present, and narrative paused but never concluded. Landry, now in his 40s, has not let the shadows of his past dictate the brightness of his future. His voice, once expected to resonate in song, now finds its expression through the lens of a camera, capturing stories in light and shadow. From the halls of Ohio University to the vibrant beat of Southern California's creative pulse, Landry has carved a name for himself in the world of music videos and commercials, his directorial vision shared through his partnerships and his own production company. Yet, amidst the success and the bustling rhythm of a life rebuilt, there remains a yearning, a brother's longing to reconnect with the sister he once knew. Landry's words, tinged with hope and concern, speak of an unfulfilled wish to see Elizabeth again, to bridge the chasm of years with the simple, human need to know she is well. His journey, one that began in the darkest of circumstances, has led Landry to a place where he can look back on his past not just with the eyes of one who has endured, but also through the creative scope of an artist. Alongside the acclaimed filmmaker Barbara Koppel, Landry has channeled his story into a documentary, A Murder in Mansfield, premiered in November 2017. This cathartic project, unveiled at the DOC NYC Film Festival, is a testament to his resilience, a way to transform pain into purpose, tragedy into art. Landry's occasional visits to the house where his life was forever altered serve as a poignant reminder of his journey. It's a place that I left a long time ago. There are challenges. There are memories here, some wonderful, some not so wonderful, some really horrible, he said. The trauma of a child facing the aftermath of a parent's heinous crime is a wound that often defies healing. For Landry, the horror wasn't confined to the events of his mother's murder, it continued into his adolescence through the venomous letters exchanged with his father, Dr. John Boyle. The contents of these letters paint a chilling portrait of a relationship severed by unfathomable betrayal. Landry's attempts to reach out, to find some semblance of peace through forgiveness and understanding, were met with vitriolic responses. His father's words, dripping with disdain, severed the father-son bond with the cruelty of rejection and denial, casting Landry out of the family he was born into. This painful correspondence is a stark reminder of the deep scars left by familial treachery, scars that Landry bravely exposed in the documentary A Murder in Mansfield. His continued efforts to engage with his father, even in the face of such scathing rebuke, reflect a strength of character and a desire for closure. Yet, despite the dark clouds that linger from his past, Landry's outlook remains remarkably positive. His declaration of being the most fortunate person he knows is a testament to his resilience and an unwavering spirit that refuses to be defined by tragedy. Dr. John Boyle, on the other hand, remains a figure mired in the consequences of his actions. His first parole bid in December 2010 was unsuccessful, and as he serves his time at Marion Correctional Institution, the next opportunity for parole looms in October 2020. At 77, the future he faces is one shaped by the past, a past that Landry, despite everything, has managed to navigate with remarkable grace and fortitude. Thank you for joining us through the twists and turns of this harrowing story. Until next time, keep seeking answers in the shadows, and remember, behind every headline lies a lesson waiting to be learned. Don't forget to leave a short comment and hit the like button.